Hello and welcome to episode 319 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Jason. It's a beautiful day here in Chicago and I'm doing well. How are you, sir?
I'm great. I'm home. I can see the sun again. We've had some terrible weather. I'm just happy that we're finally up to episode numbers that are the same number as some airplanes we all know, love, and fly.
This is true.
319. I love a good 319. They're hard to find these days, but maybe one day we'll get to some Boeing numbers.
There you go. If we keep at it long enough, we can. Although there's some Boeing numbers coming up fairly soon if you go back far enough.
Yeah, I guess if you want to take a dip into history, sure, why not?
So last week you were on the road in DC and you came to us from what was charitably be described as a wet paper bag. So we apologize a little bit for Jason's
The audio was that bad?
It wasn't that bad. There was one person who was very upset about your audio.
I was told that the microphones on my MacBook Pro are studio quality. So please direct your hate mail towards Tim Cook.
There you go. But you then did a bit more flying that wasn't necessarily work related, but a little bit more fun. And we can play the Johnny Cash song, Hey Porter.
Hey Porter. Yeah, my first time flying Porter, I got a taste of all two of their aircraft types, the Q400 and the Embraer E195 E2. And man, are those two very different, very, very different experiences. I don't think I've ever been on an airline where two aircraft are so dissimilar from each other. The Q400, which, by the way, I have not been on a Q400 or any turboprop for that matter in a very long time. Q400s are kind of a rare breed. I think that in North America, at least, the only operators are at this point in Canada that I know of. But during COVID in 2020, 2021, they put some new seats on board those Q400s. And man, are they rock hard. Not a fan of those seats.
They're bus bench level seats.
No, that's an insult to bus benches. Like, this is worse. And Porter operates those aircraft on some not short flights. Like they used to fly them all the way down from Toronto down to Florida, I think. I don't think they still do that because the E195 E2 is a thing now. And now that was my first time on an E2, and that was a nice ride. I very much enjoyed that, even if there were only 37 passengers on my flight because I flew with a friend of the show, Ned Russell, on the third day of operations on their new LaGuardia route. So that was nice.
All right. Well, welcome back.
That. Thank you.
And I'm glad you had fun. Yeah, no, I'm checking the route map right now. And yeah, they used to, I think it was Myrtle Beach that they would fly the Q400 down. But now that is no longer the case. So I'm wondering what their longest Q400 route is now.
It almost doesn't matter what the longest route by distance or block time is, because I guarantee the longest time you're going to spend on that aircraft is a flight out of Newark. And we'll get to that because Porter does operate to Newark.
Sure will.
Get how to tie that in, but
we sure will.
E2, I was talking to one of the pilots before the flight, and he came up from the Q400 and is now on the E2. And according to him, it is night and day of a difference. And I said, well, the E2 is probably day and the Q400 is night, right? And he goes, yes.
That's the same conversation that we've had with pilots on the A220 at Air Baltic over on our YouTube channel, where we've done a few videos with Air Baltic, where a lot of their pilots are former Q400 pilots. And then Air Baltic transitioned over to the A220. And those pilots are like, look, the A220 is it's an entirely different way of flying compared to that Q400. So it's interesting to see it kind of come through with the E195 E2.
Yes.
Okay. Shall we stick with a little bit of domestic stuff and just wish everybody a happy Real ID Day?
It's finally, really, actually here. And I am as shocked as you, Ian. I never thought we'd get here.
I'm flabbergasted.
I cannot believe it.
I honestly thought that they would delay it until just IDs didn't exist anymore and there was some sort of biometric scan that everybody went through. And that was just how they did things, and we didn't have IDs
that is today,
anymore.
Like that already exists. Pre-check.
No, but I mean like for everybody.
Oh, for everyone, yeah. I mean for a very select number of people, that is a thing. You can get all the way out to an international flight without ever showing anything, which is kind of crazy.
Isn't it so great?
It is great. When it works, it's really nice.
Ah, yeah, when it works.
But I don't want to be the guy that gets all the way on the flight to a foreign country and only at that point realizes I don't have my passport because nobody ever checked it. That would be
There is that.
embarrassing. But
Yeah.
just anecdotally, looking across some of the security wait times at the New York airports here, nothing looks that out of the ordinary. The terminals that are bad typically are still bad today, and the terminals that are good are still typically good today. So either people got the message or I don't know. I guess maybe it'll be fine.
They did say they were going to have some non-real ID compliant mitigation measures for folks who don't have a real ID to travel. For everyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, good, first
Good
of all.
for you.
But second of all, so the US mandated that in order to do a couple things for our purposes, air travel, but also enter federal buildings and courthouses and things like that, you need to have what they call a real ID, which is
As opposed to
basically
a fake ID, which you used in college to get alcohol.
There you go. Which has enhanced security measures and the like. So that deadline finally went into effect after I don't know how many delays. I mean, I honestly don't know how many times they delayed it.
The important context
Dozens?
here is that the Real ID mandate was put into place in the wake of 9/11. So
Yes.
that should give you an idea how long this has been in the works.
It's been a while. So it's now in place and you need one to travel, except that you don't because they said if you don't have one, you can still get on the plane and so on and so forth. So we'll keep an eye on this, but it seems like because they're enforcing it, but not sort of, they kind of are, nothing has been
clear as mud, just like every other
exactly.
TSA procedure regulation rule.
Since-
None of it matters.
yes.
It varies person to person, security lane to security lane.
This is
Go
true.
with the flow.
This is very, very true. Okay, let's go international because we've got a bunch of things happening around the world. And I won't say none of it's good, but most of it's no good. We'll go to India and Pakistan first, where last week we talked about Pakistan closing its airspace to Indian aircraft and increasing flight times and adding trip times for Indian aircraft. India responded with a reciprocal ban, closing its airspace to Pakistani aircraft, which had, in absolute terms, much smaller impact, impacting only a few flights, I think 4 round-trip flights by Pakistani Airlines to Kuala Lumpur. Then, yesterday, on the 6th of May, India conducted strikes against what it termed terrorist sites or terrorist-related sites in Pakistani-controlled Kashmir, which then led to airlines saying, okay, we're done. And most, but not all, international air traffic leaving Pakistan. So there have been a few reroutes throughout the week already where some airlines have taken a step back and said, you know what, even though we're not banned from flying in Pakistan, even though there's no prohibition from flying in Pakistan, we're just not going to do that. So looking at British Airways, except for the flight that goes to Islamabad, but all of the British Airways flights that go to India that normally fly through Pakistan don't anymore. Swiss flying around, Air France flying around already this week, ITA Airways, and the like. But airlines like Singapore Airlines, Thai, EVA, those airlines had been continuing to fly through Pakistan, through India, onwards to their destinations. That stopped yesterday, not because the airspace is necessarily closed in its entirety, though there are extensive NOTAM closures on airways within Pakistan. The problem being here, Jason, is that partially those airways are the ones that are most traveled, and so it creates a logistical problem. But then also the ones that are open adds like another 90 minutes for some flights to make it through.
So we are seeing some impact. I'm looking at Air Canada, who, after canceling a number of flights, has upgauged and added an additional flight, but those flights now have to operate via Frankfurt due to the added time between Delhi and Montreal and Toronto. So those flights are now having to stop in Germany for a crew change and additional fuel. So, man, you really feel like we're running out of airspace in that particular region. Like, crews are really, dispatchers are having to thread the needle and they're running out of, I don't know, places to put that needle.
Yeah, I mean, you basically had two main corridors. You have two main corridors Now, you have the Northern Corridor, which takes you, if you're trying to get between North America or Europe and Asia, you've got the Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, and the northern route that takes you through southern Kazakhstan. Or you have the southern route, two southern routes, depending on how your airline feels about flying over Iran or Iraq. Or you can head even further south through Egypt and Saudi Arabia. We've talked about these things before and the compression of airspace. And this is not without precedent. This has happened before where Pakistan shut its airspace entirely in 2019. So these things are not without precedent, but it's never good when this happens. And it's certainly not good now, given all of the additional airspace restrictions that have kind of popped up since then, where airlines are already avoiding so much airspace in the region. So it's something that hopefully won't expand. We're still seeing some international traffic traveling through Pakistan. Etihad is still running their flights to China and Japan and South Korea up the Western Spine. Obviously, flights to and from cities in Pakistan are still operating. Some have been canceled, but many are still operating. And then, I guess we'll just see how this plays out. It sounds like neither side wishes to escalate further, though that's never a guarantee that it won't happen.
Yeah, fingers crossed that cooler heads prevail. Not that aircraft overflight rights and ability is really the end all be all. It's just what matters to us in this very specific industry niche. But really hope this doesn't escalate for a whole lot of other very much more important reasons.
We shift southwest a little bit to Sana'a in Yemen, where last week a missile was launched towards Tel Aviv and actually struck the airport property. There has been multiple missile launches toward Tel Aviv. This missile in particular actually struck the airport property. Israel responded by basically destroying the Sana'a airport. And along with it, 3 Yemeni Airbus aircraft, an A330 and 2 A320s. So
probably aircraft they could not really afford to lose.
The airport had been closed for years and had then fairly recently, as of last fall, just reopened as a maintenance base for Yemeni. So the interesting thing here is that throughout the civil war in Yemen, there's been a fight over, for, among other things, who controls the airports and where the fleet is going to be based. So Yemeni bifurcated their fleet and had a fleet based in Sana'a and then also a fleet based out of Aden. The A320s out of Aden are still operating to destinations like Cairo and other regional places, but the A330 and the A320s, plural, that were in Sana'a are no more, at least according to the photos that I'm looking at that show them very much on fire and collapsed on the ground.
Yes, I would not expect those aircraft to fly ever again.
Airbus's AOG team is good. I don't think they're that good.
They're not Delta.
They're not Delta. Oh, they could fix anything.
They can.
So we'll keep an eye on this. Tel Aviv Airport has been operational. Some US and European carriers have canceled flights or extended flight cancellations to Tel Aviv, but the airport has remained operational as this kind of back and forth bombardment continues. So we're keeping an eye on this to see what happens next. Let's come a bit closer to home and talk about Newark.
Oh, Newark. What are we going to do with you?
Well, here's the problem, Jason. It's Newark.
Well, that's a great summary of this segment. On to the next.
And so where do we want to start with this? Because we can talk about the TCON issues. It all started
in the early 1980s when President Ronald Reagan fired all the air traffic controllers and life never recovered. But honestly, actually,
I think it goes back even probably even before that. I mean, that's certainly a large contributing factor. The PATCO strike is certainly a large contributing factor here. But just for those that don't know, Newark Airport is located in New Jersey, very near New York, just across the river.
Which is also we refer to it as New York/Newark.
Yes. Then there's JFK and LaGuardia. and all sorts of private traffic, think Teterboro and Morristown. And then that's before you even throw in any of the helicopter traffic.
And the other airports, you forgot about Westchester and Islip and all the other actual passenger airports.
Yes.
We're a busy city.
You're a busy city, and you find people have for some reason decided to put that many airports that close together, and then designed an airspace construction that on the best of days is mind-bogglingly complex, and on the worst of days just doesn't work.
Yes, so those worst of days has basically been the last 2 weeks, let's say.
And so as part of that, the workload on air traffic controllers for years has been near impossible.
Yeah, these air traffic controllers that work the New York airspace, they should be candidates for sainthood.
And there's no shortage of YouTube videos of people who work New York air traffic control doing their job. And I'm always in awe of their ability to move that many aircraft and do it safely. But there comes a point when you need to start doing something about this. And so the FAA has done not very much, but what it has done is said, okay, we're going to move the responsibility for Newark approach to Philadelphia. And Jason, can you kind of summarize what that was all about?
Well, the thinking was, hey, the New York TCON is understaffed. It doesn't have a very good pipeline in the training academy, and people don't really want to go there because the cost of living in New York is really high, and turns out the pay scale for air traffic control is not as high as it should be. So they thought, what if we moved Newark and Teterboro airspace down to Philly, where the staffing level is higher because it's the lowest in the country in the New York Center. So Philly has a higher staffing level, more candidates in the training pipeline. So, it'll work out. We'll have additional people there and more trainees on the way. Well, that might work in the long run. But basically all they've done right now is transplanted, I think, 22 air traffic controllers from the New York TCON down to Philly TCON, and that's it. In the long term, maybe this plan will work because you cannot just take someone from Philly TCON and sit them down at a Newark sector and say, you do Newark now. It doesn't work that way. That, like you said, Ian, that it's very congested, very highly skilled airspace that you have to be trained on for a long period of time in order to qualify to do those positions. You can't just take someone from Philly and put them in a Newark seat. It doesn't work that way. So right now, what we have is a situation where you've taken a select number of the New York TCON air traffic controllers, put them into Philly, and given them really crappy equipment that breaks down a lot. And surprise, surprise, that hasn't gone well.
No. And so the most recent breakdown was on the 28th of April when the radar went out and the radios went out so that pilots couldn't talk to air traffic control couldn't talk to the pilots that were on the TCON frequencies, and the TCON controllers couldn't see what was happening. And this is at least the third time something like this has happened within a year. So that creates some impetus for change. So the FAA or the DOT has said it is implementing a number of changes to speed up the airspace modernization program and ensure that this type of technology breakdown doesn't happen again.
So really what the deal is with the technology here, the issue and why we're not seeing this issue elsewhere is basically Philly Center doesn't actually have the radar data and I assume the radio data from New York TCON. And all of that data that is going from the radar dishes, the antennas and all that, that's going to New York TCON and then is remotely piped in to the Philly TCON, where the Newark controllers are in Philly. They are then, that data is all coming through New York. That apparently is the link, the weak link in the chain here that keeps breaking down. So whether they are losing all connectivity with the remote feed to New York or there's added latency, which is also an issue, that is really what the issue is here, is that the radar data doesn't actually get directly fed to Philly. It goes to New York where those controllers are supposed to be. So anytime that latency increases, think about like if you've ever played a video game and you're lagging out and suddenly something happens and you don't really know what happened and suddenly you're dead. That's not a good situation when you're controlling air traffic, and that can't work. So the system kind of I guess for lack of a better term, shuts off when it detects that the latency has spiked or the connection has dropped entirely. And that's how you end up in a situation, from what we can tell, that the controllers suddenly have no control over their sector.
And we haven't even talked about the fact that right now, Newark's main runway is shut down for construction.
Yes. So as we talk about in aviation, nothing ever happens because of one particular thing, one artifact here. Basically, what's happened in the last couple of weeks is that we have these air traffic control shortages. We know that because 20% of the already very minimal number of air traffic controllers at Newark are on leave. We'll talk about that in another second. On top of that, one of Newark's two main runways is completely closed right now for another month and a week or so for pre-planned scheduled maintenance or rehabilitation of that runway. And then we've had some really crap weather here the last couple of days. So you have understaffing of the controllers, equipment malfunctions for those controllers that remain, a runway that is closed, and bad weather. It has just made it a situation that Newark cannot function properly as an airport. At the best of times right now, it has 1.5 runways in use, but for a long period of the last couple of days, the last week really, they've been down to a single runway, which is just not going to work.
Yeah. I mean, it's untenable, feels like a good word for it. So we have Newark's largest customer, shall we say, not happy about this, obviously. But Scott Kirby of United Airlines has some ideas. And one of those ideas is to limit the number of flights, which seems like it makes sense, return Newark to a level 3 slot controlled airport. Okay. Modernize the ATC system. Sure. And fully staff Newark air traffic control. So easy stuff. Easy stuff.
Sure. No big deal. Won't take years to do
shouldn't take much time at all.
For the record, Newark was previously, up until 2016, a slot-controlled airport, just like JFK, just like LaGuardia, just like DCA. In 2016, they lowered it from slot-controlled to, I guess, schedule-constrained, and there's a set number of flights that can operate, but often that number is exceeded. It's not great. So I understand why United would call for resuming slot controls at Newark, as it would benefit United much more than any other airline. Sounds good, but that's not going to happen overnight. Neither is increasing the staffing or fixing the technology or really doing anything. It's not going to work overnight.
Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see what the FAA does about capping the number of flights that are allowed to operate, and if they can do anything short of reverting it back to a slot-controlled airport.
Yeah, they'll have to take down the number of flights per hour or per day. And to be fair, the FAA knew this was going to be a problem with the runway closure. They knew the number of flights scheduled exceeded the capabilities of Newark under most circumstances. So this was expected. But when you add on top of that the bad weather and then the air traffic control shortages, everything compounds. And it's a much worse situation in reality than what was planned for. But in the short term, today, on Wednesday, May 7th, the FAA laid out some actions that they're going to take, including 3 new high-bandwidth telecommunication connections between New York-based STARS and the Philly TRACON. That's basically some redundancy for that remote data. Replacing copper telecommunication connections with updated fiber technology. It's unclear what kind of copper technology they're using here. I hope it's not like analog, plain old telephone system copper wire, because that would...
It's plumbing. It's copper plumbing.
Oh, I knew it. It's just a series of tubes. They will also be deploying a temporary backup system to the Philly TRACON for more redundancy during that move to fiber optic networks. They don't explain what that temporary backup is, but if you've been paying attention, you might have a couple guesses what that might be, but we won't get into that.
We'll see when they actually announce it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then establishing a STARS hub at the Philly TRACON. So that would remove the leaning on the New York Center for that data. And that data, the radar data, would go directly to Philly without having to route it through New York, which would be a tremendous help because that seems to be the weakest link. And then, of course, the last bullet point is increasing controller staffing. Yeah, of course. So currently there are 22 fully certified controllers with 21 controllers and supervisors in training. However, we know that at least 20% of those 20 certified controllers are out on leave right now. So it is not a good situation. It pretty much means that everyone's got to work 6 days a week. Nobody can take any time off. Nobody can do anything other than work. And that's gonna take a real toll on these people.
Yeah.
It's not
It
great.
catches up with people.
And what doesn't help is Scott Kirby's inflammatory comment from last Friday, which has been, I'm not going to say walked back, but almost kind of doubled down on today. Last week, on May 2nd, Scott Kirby put out a message to his customers as the CEO of United Airlines. And I'll quote this one sentence. Unfortunately, the technology issues were compounded as over 20% of the FAA controllers for EWR walked off the job. End quote. I like Scott Kirby. I think he's a bright guy. I think he's done great things for United. But that comment, to not say that off the cuff in an interview or something, but to write that in a message to your customers and have all sorts of people in your internal machine approve that and publish that, man, that's just really think they're going to regret saying that. I can't imagine them winning any friends in the air traffic control union right now because those EWR controllers did not walk off the job. They took leave after experiencing a number of traumatic events on the job where all of the aircraft they were controlling, suddenly they couldn't
disappeared.
They couldn't control. They disappeared. And it is their job to safely move those aircraft through the airspace. And they couldn't do that. And I can't even imagine the stress caused by controlling a dozen aircraft and then suddenly not controlling those dozen aircraft. That has got to take a mental toll on anyone doing this job. And to say they walked off the job, Scott Kirby, you really got to pick your words better than that next time. Not going to win any friends in the industry talking like that.
No, absolutely not. Let's talk about some other airlines. We have an inkling of a glimmer of some good news here with the Pratt & Whitney geared turbofan engine issues, with JetBlue saying, we only have 10 planes on the ground right now.
You know, things are dire when you're saying we only have 10 airplanes with broken brand new engines.
So the expectation that JetBlue had at this point in the year and throughout the rest of the year was that it would have in the high teens would be the number of grounded aircraft. So they're down to 10 on the ground. That's great news. But
so you're taking our sprinkle of good news and peppering in some bad news. Is that what's happening here?
Pratt & Whitney machinists in Connecticut are now on strike.
Oh.
They voted down a deal with Pratt that they say doesn't go far enough to satisfy their demands. 3,000 workers represented by the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers, which is the same union that went on strike at Boeing and Textron Aviation last year. The union says that Pratt & Whitney, quote, failed to adequately address the membership's top concerns about wage and retirement security and offered nothing to improve job security. So they are on strike, and it doesn't sound like the negotiations are going to move forward anytime soon.
So JetBlue might be happy with that 10 number because it sounds like it could go up in the very near future.
Yeah. So hopefully they can come to the table and strike a deal soon. Otherwise, the increasing uncertainty in the aerospace supply chain will get even more uncertain.
Cool.
In a continuing trend, Canadian Airlines are reducing flights to the U.S., with WestJet joining the mix now, saying, quote, a downward shift in transborder travel demand has led them to reduce the number of flights on 9 routes. Some of these are being pushed back. Instead of starting now-ish, they're being pushed back until June. Some are being held back until October, while others are just being reduced in frequency. So it's a fluctuating mix of how airlines are dealing with this, but we now have pretty much all major Canadian airlines saying we're reducing the amount we fly to the US, with Air Canada, WestJet, and Porter as well.
Yeah, I guess it's very localized, city by city. I guess more leisure-focused destinations are going to be impacted because here in New York, every Air Canada flight I have seen or been on recently has gone out completely full. So,
yeah, exactly.
That checks out to me. So it's going to be market by market. Don't read into me saying earlier that my Porter flight to LaGuardia had 37 passengers on it because that was a 3-day-old route. But I'm doing my best to offset the downward trend here because I just spent the last 2 weekends in Canada going back again in June. So I'm doing my best.
There you go. This aligns with what we've been seeing from other low cost and leisure carriers, where the demand pullback, especially over the summer, is really hitting airlines that cater to folks who go on vacation once a year. Yep. And those routes that WestJet is reducing or cutting, and some of the other routes that we've seen, really lends itself to the fact that these are vacation and holiday destinations for folks who don't fly a lot. And that demand is just evaporating.
Yeah, and I can't imagine that the bottom has fallen out here, because if passengers booked their flight months ago, they're probably still going. But if they're now booking for travel 2 months from now, the situation could be pretty different come the middle of the summer.
It's definitely going to be interesting to see what forward look like over the next 30 to 60 days.
Yeah.
But even further out in time, Iceland Air reports that it is phasing out its 767s by 2029.
Oh.
Yeah, that's fine. But this is the important news, Jason. It won't replace them with another wide body.
Oh, I mean, there really aren't any that Iceland Air could probably want of that. I mean, never say never. I mean, maybe the 787-8 could be a good fit for Iceland Air one day, right? Maybe.
One day, maybe.
One day.
But
I mean, the 76s are
relatively
new in the Iceland Air world. Those have only been in service since like 2017, something along those lines?
They say they're getting back to their roots. They say that they're getting back to doing what they do well, which is operating narrow body aircraft more efficiently to points further east and further west than anyone in their competition can do. So good for them.
Yeah.
But don't look out for any wide bodies. After 2029, it's pretty much A321 LRs, XLRs, and Boeing MAX 8s and 9s from here on out.
Yep. We'll see what the future holds, but I love Iceland Air 76s. They're just so comfy.
It's like riding in a Cadillac. It's just a squishy, comfy seat.
Yes.
This is a story that popped up last week that we didn't have time to talk about because you were in between meetings when we recorded the podcast.
That's true.
I felt that we absolutely needed to discuss this, if only because I like complimenting the Flight Global headline writer every once in a while.
When we see a headline this good, we can't just let it go.
The headline here is Sweden loses out to LA after heart transplants operation.
Ah, get it?
I do get it. So for those that are going, what? Heart is the manufacturer of a hopeful electric hybrid aircraft. It was the ES-19, now it's the ES-30, the 30 standing for the number of passengers that aircraft is supposed to carry when it's certified, hopefully by the end of this decade. They were based in Gothenburg, Sweden. We actually visited them, went and saw the whole thing. We'll put a link in the show notes to that video over on our YouTube channel. And they were, cruising along. And then last week, they announced that we're moving from Sweden to LA because that's where all of the people who are giving us money are.
And it seems like, I don't know, launching operations is something like this in LA seems like more opportunity than Sweden. As much as I love Sweden, I'll be there in a couple of weeks. LA just seems like the right place for it.
So, yeah, the reason they're moving is that the funders of this particular aircraft are mostly based in the US. The company, Heart, is actually technically a US-based company and has been for a while. They created an American parent company that was controlling the Swedish company. So this thing has been in the works for a while, but now they are, in fact, moving out. So lots of folks in Sweden not very happy about that, feeling kind of baited and switched, I guess.
You were the incubator. It's okay.
Yeah.
We acknowledge the work that you've done.
But they're off to LA now. Let's see. Some other airline news that we didn't get to last week that I thought was worth discussing. Play Airlines, which began as kind of a wow 2.0, but then said, nah, it's not working. So we're gonna figure something else out. They're refocusing on leisure destinations, but now they're also refocusing on leasing out their aircraft to other carriers. So this is where it gets fun. Play is Icelandic based, but they set up a Maltese AOC and put a bunch of aircraft on that AOC.
As one does, not unique.
That Maltese division is going to damp lease 10 A320neo family aircraft to the Maltese division of Ukrainian-based Sky Up Airlines.
And what's Ukrainian-based Sky Up Airlines going to do with it?
Well, they're going to operate out of their Maltese division.
Oh, what are they going to do with those?
So just do leisure stuff around Europe.
Oh, okay.
So,
That's nice.
so Sky Up has been operating because they obviously can't fly in Ukraine.
Exactly.
They've been doing other things. Yeah, they've been doing other things. So Play is going to have 7 aircraft in its own operations this summer, much less transatlantic flying, much more flying Europeans down to Gran Canaria, the Azores, things like that. And Sky Up is basically going to do the same thing in Play aircraft, but as Sky Up.
So Play, who hasn't been able to make it work in the North America to Europe world, transferred some of its aircraft to a Maltese division to then transfer it to the Maltese division of Ukraine's Sky Up Airlines, who will then use those aircraft to do stuff in Europe, not touching Ukraine. Yep, that all checks out.
That all checks out.
Somehow money will be made.
Somehow. Let's see, what else did we miss last week? Oh, we can talk about Etihad's A321XLR first class cabins. And I'm using air quotes here because they're first-ish.
First-ish, yeah. This is a real first world problem here. But with aircraft like the 321 XLR or LR, or even just regular 321, and a lot of other wide-body aircraft, airlines have kind of phased out first class in favor of something called Business Plus, which is the business class seats in the bulkhead. The first row of the cabin typically have a bit more space, and you can customize it and do a couple fancy things. And this is pretty widespread now from airlines from JetBlue to Condor to Air France. It's a bit all over the place, but it is just a seat in the business class cabin. But someone at Etihad had the thought of, why don't we just sell it as first class and call it first class? And it'll really just be, the business class seat with a couple extra tweaks and things. But we don't even have to put a divider between business class and first class. We could just call it first class. And John Walton over at Runway Girl Network has a very good analysis and takedown of this. But it's just a very odd choice. But I guess if you include all the ground services and the chauffeur and extra
I think
caviar,
that's really what this is all
the
about.
play. I think Business Plus is hard to sell since it's not a fare. But if you're going to go all the way to sell it as first class, you should probably make it first class. And at least, put a curtain there to separate your first class passengers from the business class peasants.
Let's go the other way and talk about air taxis. Kind of.
Huh?
We've got high frequency, low, no, I wouldn't say low frills, but just people that are on the road a lot, they need high frequency traffic. And Jason, we used to call these certain things, but we're not allowed to call them.
We're not allowed to call them that anymore. You could call it whatever you want, as long as you don't call it a shuttle, Ian.
Okay.
Don't call it a shuttle. To be fair, United, who we're talking about here, never called its route between, as far as I'm aware, between New York and Chicago, a shuttle. That was for the Americans in the deltas of the world. But somehow in the year 2025, United now operates 15 daily trips between Chicago O'Hare and New York LaGuardia. And that's damn near a shuttle level frequency if I've ever heard one. But they don't call it a shuttle. But now they're taking its operation at O'Hare and guaranteeing, and I'm quoting here, guaranteeing that those flights will depart out of gates B1 to B8 in Chicago. And those are very close to security and very close to the United clubs, which are all very shuttly things to do, but don't call it a shuttle, Ian.
Okay, I won't.
But I would love to see someone bring back the shuttle because shuttles kind of died during COVID, or they were kind of death by a thousand cuts where they cut this, they cut that. And eventually during COVID, the shuttle branding just disappeared. It wasn't sunset. There was no last shuttle flight. There was no media, no press release. It was just, they're gone now. And that was a big part of kind of New York aviation for decades, where the shuttles between New York, Boston, DC, and to a lesser extent, Chicago, but they're gone. But I don't know, United's one step closer to bringing back a shuttle, and I'm here for it.
More shuttles. That's what we need.
More shuttle, more good.
And before we go, the fourth Boeing 777X flying test aircraft is, in fact, flying again. This is the first time that WH-004 has flown since November of 2021. You can track that as November 779 X-Ray Zulu. And with that, Jason, that's episode 319 of AvTalk. Thanks, everyone, so very much for listening. If you like the podcast, you can comment on the episode, either on the Flight Radar 24 blog, or Spotify has built-in comments if you listen to the podcast there. You can also leave us a rating or review wherever you listen to this podcast, whether that's Apple for a good chunk of you, Spotify for another good chunk of you, or a smattering of other podcast players for the rest of you. And we thank you all very much for listening. I am Ian Petchnik, here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.